Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today I'm going to be going over my top 10 tips for fighting Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva. Lucky for us, Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva almost feels like a brand new monster, so these tips should be especially useful. Let's get started. Tip number 1 is going to be all about dealing with the large amounts of fire damage that you're going to be taking. Xeno'jiiva is going to be constantly heating the ground up until it turns a glowing orange color. Walking on that heat will apply Fireblight to your character and deal continuous damage until you step off of it. Avoiding those heated spots will actually save you quite a bit of health because it does a surprising amount of damage, right? That being said, it's a little unrealistic to think you could play the whole match and avoid those hot spots the entire time, so Fireblight becomes a serious issue. When you pair the Fireblight damage with the damage from the floor, you can be cut down to about a third of your health in just a few seconds, which is typically all Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva needs in order to be able to one-shot you with his next move. So I'm going to recommend bringing your fire resistance up to at least 20, and this will give you immunity to Fireblight. Don't forget that you can order elemental resistance at the canteen, and it's actually a pretty generous amount of elemental resistance. Tip number 2. So now that we've talked about countering Fireblight, the other issue is that you need to be able to regenerate your health back up to full. Because like I said, if Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva can bring you down by a third of your health, he can definitely one-shot you. The other thing you're going to need is health regeneration, meaning whichever weapon you decide to make your build around, be sure that it's been augmented for health regen. That way you can constantly be bringing your health back up as the heated ground tries to bring it down. I found that for melee playstyles, health regeneration was basically a requirement. If you're playing solo like I normally do, you also want to consider bringing the Vigor Wasp spray on your Palico. And if you're playing on a team, you and your team should invest in the wide range skill in order to keep everyone at full health throughout the fight. Tip number 3. So far, Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva has not been able to true combo me from a roar. By true combo, I mean he hasn't been able to attack me while I was still incapacitated by his roar, right? Like we know that Teostra is able to true combo from a roar. This means you don't have to build earplugs. However, I'm going to highly recommend building tremor resistance because Xeno'jiiva uses a wing attack similar to what Nergigante has, and this move will actually true combo from the tremors into an explosion for high damage. Is pretty inexpensive to build tremor resistance, and is also going to let you spend more time damaging Xeno'jiiva rather than crawling around his feet. The Zora Gamma chest piece and the regular Diablos legs are both very good options for building tremor resistance. Tip number 4. If you're having trouble defeating Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva with randoms, then you should go ahead and try soloing him. I personally think that soloing is much easier than having a shared life pool with randoms. This is especially true because you can use the strongest skill in the game, Fortify, to heavily boost your defense after dying twice. The method that I use is to go in, see how much damage I can deal to Xeno'jiiva before losing my first 2 lives. On my 3rd life, Fortify has now procced twice to give me very high defense and pretty high attack, and then I eat all of my regular buffs as well as eating a meal at the camp. See, I didn't eat a meal at the beginning, I waited until I died twice, then I ate a meal. The change in survivability at this point is extremely noticeable. Most notably, you'll see that you can survive attacks that would have one-shot you. Tip number 5, this is a simple one. Don't forget to bring your Nullberries. Xeno'jiiva has a few moves that apply Dragon Blight, and he can apply it pretty consistently. Since this tip was so short, I'll throw in an extra tip. I don't recommend worrying about poison damage unless you're using a bow or bowgun that can easily apply the poison without interrupting your main source of damage. I did run some poison builds against Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva, and I wasn't impressed with them at all. Tip number 6 is the tip about which mantles to bring. You know that the Rocksteady mantle and the Temporal mantle are the most powerful mantles in the game, but you should also consider the Dragon-proof mantle and especially the Fire-proof mantle. Notice that you can rotate through each of these mantles as you die, or you can simply use a Farcaster to travel back to camp and then change your mantles out. I also want to recommend saving your mantles for whenever Xeno'jiiva becomes enraged and when he becomes powerful, that is when he begins to glow orange. So tip number 7, when Xeno'jiiva is powered up and glowing orange, you can cause him to become knocked down very quickly just by damaging his chest enough. This also happens to make it easier to damage his chest further because, once he's actually been knocked down, you have access to his chest. And you can actually chain knockdowns this way. So this tip is pretty important because now you know to save your mantles until Xeno'jiiva enters his powered up phase and then to knock him over by damaging his chest. If you can't knock him down easily in this phase, you're going to be in for a rough ride for the whole fight because he uses a lot of powerful attacks in quick succession when he's in this mode. Your best bet is to take the time to practice learning how to avoid all of his moves because if you just try to spam your attacks, he's going to quickly overwhelm you. The other part to this tip is that when he's in his overpowered state, it looks like all of the parts of his body actually receive more damage, and I believe everything becomes a weak spot. Alright, and now in tip number 8, I want to start talking about how to avoid some of his key moves. Probably one of his most dangerous moves is the sweeping beam attack that Val-Hazak also uses. Avoiding it works exactly the same way as it did with Val-Hazak. You need to detect that Xeno'jiiva is winding up the beam and then run toward his head until you can get behind it. You can actually guard the beam, but keep in mind you're going to need the guard up skill in order to be able to do this, or else it's just going to cut through you like butter. You could also do a Superman dive to avoid the beam, which a Superman dive, it causes you to have more iframes than a regular dodge. But I wouldn't let this be my first choice because the dive is pretty risky. You do risk the beam actually hitting you. For those of you who don't know how to do a Superman dive, simply turn your back to the damage and then dive like you normally would and it'll turn into a Superman dive. I also strongly suspect the Final Fantasy emote can dodge the beam. I don't actually know if it can because I haven't tested it, in case one of you guys wanted to go test it and see if we can add a little more flair to our fights. Also, players using the insect glaive can easily jump over the beam. And one more method, there are some small rocks found in the middle of the arena which you can actually stand behind to avoid the beam. Be sure though that you are actually standing in the right spot as the beam passes over, because I've used the rocks before and actually still got clipped by the beam one time. So you got to be sure you're really standing behind the rock. Alright, we're almost done. Tip number 9, another major pain in the butt is the attack where Xeno'jiiva breaks the ground with both of his forearms. When he does this, a wave of eruptions is going to track you. That's right, it's going to actually follow you for a pretty far distance. So whatever you do next, you need to start moving away from Xeno'jiiva fast. Even players who are guarding can have trouble with this move because it deals so much chip damage. The Temporal Mantle is the easiest way to get around this attack and continue to deal high damage because it's very easy to punish Xeno'jiiva after the mantle is done doing the dodging for you, if that makes sense. You can also try to tank through the attack with the Rocksteady mantle and then try to generate enough of your health back, with the health regen augmentation, so that it wouldn't have mattered if you'd been hit by the move. Of course, you'll become dragon blighted, but for some players that's not such a bad deal. A last part to this tip is to be careful not to find yourself trapped by a wall or a ledge when the wave of eruptions come after you. They have so much range that you can easily find yourself stuck with nowhere to go. If you're using the Fortify strategy that I talked about earlier, you should be able to easily survive this attack as long as you had a fair amount of health before it landed. Tip number 10 is to just slow down. A lot of players want to think of Arch Tempered Xeno'jiiva as another bullet sponge that they can mow down with overpowered weapon A or overpowered weapon B, but the truth is that he feels much more like a real boss where you're going to have to actually react to his moveset, as well as conservatively attacking him when he is in a punishable position. If you just rush in to deal high damage like the majority of randoms do, and you're not an actual speedrunner who really understands the mechanics of the game and can keep the monster juggled the entire time, then Xeno'jiiva is going to win the fight because he's going to outlast your attacks and eventually catch you with the one shot. Alright, and now for the bonus tip. If you're playing a melee build, keep your eyes open for the Slinger bomb pods. If you land all 3 of those pods, you're going to deal just about 120 damage to Xeno'jiiva, and you can use them when he's in the air, when he's airborne. The other thing I like to do when he's airborne is I sheath my weapon and run around, and then I wait for him to use one of his bigger attacks, and he tends to take a big pause afterwards. So once I know the attack's going to miss me, I go ahead and I sharpen my weapon. So that's the other thing I do when he's in the air. Alright, well that's everything I wanted to talk about. If you watched this guide to the end and found some of the tips useful, consider sharing it or leaving a like so that others can find it. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.